It is. No. And prior, and now prior to this. He's doing charges for it. Yeah, mine does. No, it might be that I have, things out there, that's part of the problem, but it does not.
Probably not, it's just after you light it up.
Battery, yeah, it starts to crank itself out pretty quickly.
I'd like to call the November 18th Granville Exempted Village School District Board of Education meeting to order. Please join me, rise to the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to welcome everyone to tonight's meeting. Take the roll, please.
Mr. Wolf?
Here.
Ms. Shaw? Here. Ms. Deeds? Here. Mr. Crum?
Here.
Mr. Miller?
Here. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Second.
Take the roll, please.
Ms. Deeds? Aye. Ms. Shaw? Aye. Mr. Crum?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye. Mr. Brown, accommodations.
So, good evening. We have a first. We have someone joining us from out of the country for accommodation. So, tonight we'd like to recognize 4 GHS students for being recognized, actually 4 students that we're recognizing for 2 different reasons. So the first, 2 of our students are being recognized as commended scholars or semifinalists in the National Merit Scholarship Program. The National Merit Scholarship Program honors individuals, students who show exceptional academic ability and potential for success in rigorous college studies. Over 1.3 million juniors in about 21,000 high schools enter the 2024 Merit Scholarship Program by taking the 22 preliminary PSAT, which serves as an initial screen for the program entrance. Over 16,000 semifinalists and more than 15,000 are expected to advance to the finalist level in February, and they will be notified of this designation at that time. Finalists can compete for up to 2,500 National Merit Scholarships that are awarded on a state representational basis. In addition, about 160 colleges and universities are expected to finance some of the college scholarships that are awarded by the Merit Scholarship finalists. The winners of the 2024 will be announced beginning in April and concluding in July. These scholarship recipients will join nearly 375,000 other distinguished young people who have earned the status of Merit Scholar title. We have 2 students tonight, National Merit Commended Scholar Miwa Davis and National Merit semifinalist Alex Serwick. So joining us on the screen is, I believe, Mr. John Davis, who is overseas right now representing his daughter. And we have Alex here in person. Mr. Davis, would you like to say anything?
Sure. Really quickly, maybe I'd just like to, on behalf of the family, thank everyone, at Granville who's been part of Miwa's academic and personal journey. We really appreciate it. We think of it as a group honor. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Alex, come on up. Congratulations. And Mr. Davis, we will have a pin waiting for Miwa when she returns.
Excellent. I'll make sure she knows.
Okay, thank you. We are also proud to recognize 2 exceptional GHS students who have achieved a perfect score on testing. This is a rare and outstanding accomplishment, one that I can say I never achieved personally. So their hard work and dedication have not only set them apart, but also brought great pride to our school community. Yingling Yang, who is a sophomore at GHS, scored a perfect 1600 on the SAT and a perfect 1520 on the PSAT. Owen White, a junior at GHS, scored a perfect 1520 on the PSAT. This is an accomplishment that reflects their commitment to learning and sets an inspiring example. I look forward to seeing all the great things you both will achieve in the future. And I know personally that both of them are not just about academics. They're more well-rounded than that. So congratulations, and what an achievement. Come on up. Get pictures. Okay, get pictures over here. Parents. All right, great. Next, we get to recognize one of our outstanding staff members. Outdoor Tomorrow Foundation State Teacher of the Year. The Outdoor Tomorrow Foundation is a national nonprofit with a mission to teach outdoor education and fund and promote wildlife conservation worldwide. The OTF's Outdoor Adventures K-12 curriculum is taught in all 50 states and Canada. Expanding kids' knowledge and awareness of outdoor skills and wildlife conservation principles will ensure future generations will enjoy our natural resources. Engaging kids in the outdoor opens new opportunities for lifelong enhanced well-being, and we certainly know about that here in Granville. GIS physical education teacher Meredith Irvin was nominated for this award by Scott McClure of the foundation. Through the past several years, Meredith has shared the program with our students and with him while attending the OFERG conference together. To be nominated, a teacher must have taught outdoor education as a part of the PE curriculum for the last 2 years. And have a program that encourages extracurricular programs such as archery, hiking, camping, fishing, shooting sports, etc. And the students' impact and potential of past program growth. Meredith will be recognized at the OFERG convention in December and is the first recipient of this award. She will be receiving a gift certificate for equipment and will be in the running for National Teacher of the Year award that will be recognized in February. So congratulations, Meredith. Come on in. Congratulations. Oh, you're getting a picture too? Okay. We love photo opportunities.
Mine's not excellent.
Excellent. Thank you. Sure Janelle puts it a little bit bigger print. It's a little bit harder for these old eyes to see now. Congratulations to all the parents and students and staff that were recognized tonight. This is now the time that if you want to depart, you will want to depart.
More work for you.
Okay, we're at the point of the agenda for staff reports. Brittany?
Thank you. Tonight, I will present the 5-year forecast with our sources of revenue and enrollment projections. Lastly, I want to recognize the administration and board and finance committee for their collaboration on this. This is always a group effort, and I appreciate all the feedback that goes into this process. So jumping into the high-level summary graph, there's a lot going on in this graph, so I want to kind of walk through it. For purposes of the forecast, the years are always labeled with the fiscal year, and the last year being the fiscal year. So 25 is the current year for the school year 24-25 that we're in right now. So 22 through 24 are historical actuals, and then 25 through 29 are the forecasted years. The blue bars here represent total revenue, the orange represents total expenditures, and then the lines, the green and the red line represent our cash balance policy. And the goal is to kind of keep our actual cash balance within that threshold. And you can see that that's a really narrow window that we're trying to maintain, and that the cash balance fluctuates over time. So looking at this extended history and then the projection, you can really see the levy cycle here as cash builds up after we pass the income tax, and then starts to decline as our expenditures begin to exceed our revenue in any given year. So the biggest change from the May forecast is really not anything in the assumptions. It's just the fact that we're now in fiscal year 25, which is when we're projecting to start spending more than what we're bringing in this individual year. So that's why you start to see a declining cash balance. It's also really hard to see on this graph, but we also now have on here the renewal of the income tax. So we have to show that revenue separately out in 29. So that's, you can kind of see the difference in that line all the way out in 29. So we'll be able to see that better on the next slide. Actually, 2 slides. I'm also combining the October financial report, so trying to incorporate our October data, which is what we used when we completed the forecast. So the same concept with the levy cycle and the cash balance fluctuating over years, the same thing occurs month to month. So we have high points and low points during the year. So for the month of October, we ended slightly higher than where we were last year. However, if you look out to the June projection, the blue bar is less than the gray bar, which is the same concept that I talked about, where cash balance is starting to decline over the previous year. So the point I'm trying to make is that we see the levy cycle, we see the cash balance cycle, and all of this is consistent with what we've been communicating and seeing over the past several forecast cycles. So looking at the raw data, I think helps in this instance just because it's hard to see that discrepancy with the income tax renewal out in 25. So I will just highlight this bolded line, which is the revenue surplus or deficit. So that's how much revenue or how much expenditures exceed revenue. So if that's negative, expenditures are higher than revenue. So that's why you see a negative number all 5 years. And then the ending cash balance with the income tax renewal out in 29 is $185,000. Without that, that's that very bottom line all the way to the right, that negative $1 million. So what this is showing us is that even with the income tax renewal, we will be looking at needing more operating funds when we get to fiscal year '29. The next slide articulates this in terms of our cash balance policy. So as a reminder, our policy that we try to stay between is 90 to 160 days. So essentially we take our total expenditures and we take out our transfers and advances. So if you recall, we started the capital transfers fund just so that we can have a true operating base of cash. So you divide total expenditures by 365 days in the year. So that's where we're coming up with the total number of days for each of the years. And you see that actually in 28 is when we are below the policy, and in 29, when considering that fluctuation of cash throughout the year, there would be points throughout the year where we wouldn't have enough cash to support the expenditures. I'll emphasize again that this is a forecast and that there's things that we can do between now and then. And all of this is based on the assumptions that go into the forecast. So I will get into those now.
In what year does the current 5-year renewal of the income tax end?
28, December of 28. Okay, so first looking at total revenue overview, the historical change is significantly higher than what our projected year-over-year changes, and that's almost entirely due to the income tax. So during the historical period, it included the phase-in of the income tax, and then the projected period just includes any incremental increases that we would get from the income tax, which is really our only source of revenue that is expected to grow over time.
And so in that context, the income tax would continue to grow at more than GDP, but because our property tax doesn't grow at all, or substantially with inflation, so the balance of those two is 2%,
Right.
which is less than inflation.
Right. Yep, and then the graph on the left, just to highlight that even with the income tax, property tax remains to be our largest source of revenue, which largely offsets any increase that we see in the income tax. So digging into property tax revenue, as we've talked about in the past and alluded to, as property values increase with reappraisal and update, as they did in 2023, tax rates are adjusted down so that the revenue that is collected by the school district remains about the same. The only increase that we see with that is on the inside millage, which is a small portion of our total tax base. The other piece is new construction. So we do see increased property tax revenue with new construction, and we do have some assumptions included in the forecast for developments that we know of right now. For example, Willow Bend, Glenshire, and some others. As we get information and specifics on those developments, we're always checking the auditor site to see what the values of those homes are and updating our assumptions. But a couple notes that property taxes are based on, or are collected in the year following the tax year. So when reappraisal occurred in 2023, those taxes are collected in 2024, which is split between our fiscal year 24 and 25. So it's a delayed process, and we would begin to see students from new developments before we would actually start to collect property tax revenue from them. So this does include the reappraisal at about 30% in 23, and as you can see, revenue did not jump way up 30% with that increase in values, which further indicates that reduction factor concept. And then similarly in 26, we're expecting another increase with the triennial update, which is typically historically less than what you see in a reappraisal year. And obviously 23 is an exception to what our historical trend has been. So that's at 7.25 is what is our assumption for that next update year.
Do you know what, within this kind of time frame, the projected increase in property values are? Like roughly, what's the annual increase in property values? You know what I'm saying?
No.
Okay.
So
So I guess it's just driven by the reappraisal years.
yeah, so your only change in value between your reappraisal and update is new construction. So that valuation gets added on if a certain percentage of construction is completed by the deadlines for tax bills. So if you're thinking about the 30% reappraisal, that's for a 3-year period. So you can think about that as 10% per year.
Okay, that's good.
Real quick, in like layperson's terms, why, when the property values go up, do the schools not get more money? I mean, I understand that the tax rates are adjusted down, I see that, but like, is it a state rule, is it a?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Yes, that is state specific, it's House Bill 920, which states exactly that, that as values go up due to inflation, the tax rate is reduced, and that is how you calculate what property tax bills are. It takes your value times the tax rate, and then that's what you pay in property taxes, which then obviously translates to what we collect in revenue. There is a big asterisk that I'll add to that, which is the 20 mil floor. So part of House Bill 920 says that you can't, that tax rate cannot go down below 20. So districts that are on the 20 mil floor, as values increase, they do see an increase in revenue, and their taxpayers do see an increase in their tax bills. And that's the challenging thing in Granville specifically, because all other school districts in Licking County are on the 20 mil floor. So if you're talking to friends throughout the county, they may have seen a very different tax bill or experience than what you may have seen with this reappraisal.
I'm kind of curious a little bit to try and understand how much of this small, relatively small increase in property tax revenue is driven by new construction versus existing, right? Because, I mean, this says it looks like about 2% per year growth in property tax revenue, but I would expect not that much property tax increase for existing houses. So there's a little bit of inside millage in there and things like that. It might be interesting to try and like ferret that out and show like existing residents, your tax is flat, except for this little bit of inside millage, and this other stuff is coming from growth. Like,
Yeah,
so I was kind of surprised, it's like, that's like 2% growth, which is like pretty much relative to inflation, but you're also talking about new houses and new students and new construction and all that kind of stuff.
Right, yeah. It's definitely a complicated equation, and it's why if you kind of look at 25 through 27, like those years are relatively flat. When you get out to 29, there is a little bit of a larger bump in 29, because that does have more of the new construction piece
Okay.
in it, with the Russell and Foster properties that we've talked about. I don't know if that exactly addresses your point, but.
And new construction, to the extent that there's an addition onto a house that adds value to the house, is not really included in this, because that's all rolled into the existing reappraisal, is that right? Or is new construction like you put a swimming pool in your house or a garage or something like incremental
Yeah, so
tax revenue?
my understanding, and I'm not necessarily an expert on the valuation process and the appraisal process, but something like a minor improvement, like a pool or something like that, you're not going to see that in new construction. That's part of the reappraisal process.
Okay, right. So it's a redistributed value effect.
Correct. So another big disclaimer, I guess, getting into the details, is if your property valuation increased at a rate higher than 30%, so you were higher than the average, your tax bill will go up, because there are people in the community whose valuations increase by an amount less than 30%, which I know is hard to believe. We just don't hear from those people because they're not complaining that their tax bill went down. But yes, we always talk about the average person who increased at exactly 30%, their tax bill didn't increase. But the reality is, people are all over the place.
That's one of the challenges I've kind of had before in levy cycles, is that when we talk about the fact that property taxes generally readjust and don't increase with the value of the home, people say, well, like, my property taxes went up a lot. And it's like, well, I know, let's look at that a little bit. It's like, then it happens, like, well, I did add like a whole new barn and a swimming pool and 2 extra rooms, and now my house is worth 3 times as much as it was before. It's like, well, that might have an impact, right, on the valuation of your house, which impacts your property taxes, so.
Yeah.
It's tricky.
Another point that I'll make, since we're on the topic, often what the valuation of your home is, does not and what you're being taxed on does not necessarily equate to what I would consider the value to be, which is what you would actually list your house if you're going to sell it.
Right.
It's often significantly less than that, which is interesting. You would think the value that you're paying taxes on would be what the actual value is, which would be driven by sales. And so in the big picture it is, but it's not the exact value. And then also, your taxable value is 35% of what you would typically consider to be the valuation of your home. So that's another important concept just to understand too.
And I think Licking County has done a better job than many places around Ohio about trying to align assessed value with actual property value. There's many places where, values have not adjusted appropriately over time, and so there's a real skew between existing long-term owners and newer owners and things like that. And I think that the county has tried to make that work well. So,
Yeah,
thank the auditor's office for their work on that, but it's tricky because when you adjust property values, people's tax bills do change relative to each other and so forth. That's the thing.
Yep, absolutely. And it does vary county to county, and those values are approved by the state, so
Right.
That's all a process that occurs behind the scenes that goes into the tax bill.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Moving on to income tax revenue assumptions. In the past, so there's 2 buckets of income tax revenue. The first is withholdings. So this is what you would think of as your typical payroll income. So your employer is withholding your income tax, and then that's paid to the school district quarterly. That portion of the income tax revenue tends to increase. There's not large fluctuations. And so with that line item, we're assuming an increase of 5%. The second piece is payments with returns and estimated payments. And our split between those 2 buckets is about 50-50. And that second bucket, that is where you see more variability. This is where we see revenue adjusting with the economic conditions of the community. Tends to be less predictable, and includes business income and other things driven by the market, I think, on a larger scale. So with that, there's more volatility. That's where we saw a significant decrease in 2024. And it's kind of been all over the place, making it really hard to get a historical trend. In 21 and 22 increased significantly, higher than what we were expecting, but then in 24 we saw a decrease. So on that side, we're assuming a 1.5% increase. And honestly, this didn't change the projections significantly in total, but I think it's helpful when we get the quarterly payments because we don't get a lot of information. It does allow us to more accurately compare to the forecasted amounts.
We don't have visibility to that split between withholdings and payments with returns and estimates?
We do. That's pretty much all the detail that we have.
So we could almost put on that graph like 2 parts of the bar, like the one part of the bar would be withholdings. And the other part would be
It's about
to show
50-50.
that variability. But in like the bad years or tougher years like 2024, the withholdings would have kind of held steady, and in good years, the payments with returns and dividends and so
Right.
forth would be higher.
Yeah.
And we do have that visibility.
Yes.
That allows us to kind of forecast what a new levy would be, or that split.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And then the orange portion in 29, again, is the income tax renewal, so we have to show that piece separately. So that's the amount of revenue that would be lost if the income tax were not renewed. Jumping to October, because October was an income tax month payment, the income tax was 6.5% over prior year, which actually happened to be the exact amount that we have in the forecast, or very close to it. So that was, I think, a very positive indicator that we're going to see a continued increase in the income tax payments through the rest of this fiscal year. So that's positive after the decrease that we had last year.
That's why you're an international.
I don't know about that. The other piece that makes the income tax line item very difficult to forecast is that we don't have a very long history. So property tax goes back decades of data that we can use to draw trends, but we don't have that on the income tax revenue side. But since the income tax that we have is a traditional and not just earned, it is taxed based on the same taxable income amount as the state. So we can look at what the state income tax, or what the state taxable income amount was to draw a trend. So that also aligns with those numbers that we talked about on the previous slide. The other thing that I'll highlight here is that we don't often see 2 years of decline back to back. So that's another positive sign that it's unlikely that when the 23 data comes in, that will be another decrease over 22.
It'd be valuable for me, just going to be a thought process, to look at that previous chart, with each bar split up into two. Payments from withholding and the others and so forth, just to kind of see where that
That I
variability
don't
comes
think
from.
we have, because this is based on state total taxable income. The detail that you're referring to, we get because we get the revenue payments from it now.
Okay.
So this is state data.
Yeah.
I can look, but
Because I see, like, I just trying to put that together in my mind, kind of, because I think we can forecast payments with withholding, right, more readily than we can the variability of the other, and having that like picture in my mind and seeing, wow, sometimes this top bar, which is variable, it happens what it is in other years or whatever, would be just interesting for me to see. It seems like there might be a way to ferret that out, but you'll have to look into it.
So the total, or the final piece for, on the revenue side is state funding. And the way that I have the bars broken down here is based on the guarantee amount shown separately. And the reason for that is we have the state funding formula, which takes the 8,081 that is calculated, is what the formula is saying. It costs $8,000 per pupil to educate in Granville. What portion of that is going to be funded locally and what portion is going to be funded by the state? So that calculation comes out to 13% state funded. However, at the end of that calculation is a guarantee. So the guarantee says that the district will receive the same amount of revenue that it received in 2020. So it's important for us to look at the guarantee amount separately because the state funding formula does change every 2 years. So if the guarantee were to be removed from the funding formula, you can see what that impact would be pretty clearly. The other item to note on state funding is that the calculated funding is $8,000 per pupil. What we actually spend per pupil is more like $13,000 to $14,000 per pupil. So the difference between those two numbers is also made up locally. So the takeaway, the message from this slide is we are not anticipating to get any more state funding, even as we anticipate enrollment growth over time. So unlike some neighboring districts that as they have a residential development come in, they get not only the increase in property tax revenue from the new construction, not only the increase from the 20 mil floor, they also get the increase in the state funding as a per pupil allocation.
That's a huge point right there that I think is worth thinking about and understanding a little bit, is that the challenge that we have with growth is because that we don't really get more revenue to cover additional kids. That's not the case in the rest of Licking County and many other districts, get much more support from the state, so as they add up homes and children and things like that, not only again, they get their property tax increase, they also get substantial support from the state. That's the crux of it.
And that's the case with any, what the state considers wealthy district?
Correct, yes, that's the big key in the state funding formula, is there is a property value component, which is 60%, income, which is 40%, but then you do that calculation, and then there's a capacity multiplier, which is solely based on income, so essentially the whole thing is based on income. Yeah.
And Granville has always been a wealthy school district based on our property values, and a very wealthy school district based on our incomes.
I think it would be interesting, not for right now, but especially as we think about a levy, I think it'd be really interesting to see what are we spending on each student. The state says we should be spending 8,000, or that's as much as we need. Clearly not giving us that, but in any case, why are we spending 13 or 14? I'm not.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say, so I think I have a slide in here with the expenditure per pupil, so you can see the value, but to understand yes, the actual costs that go into it.
For another time, not
Yeah.
right now at all, but yeah, I'm just thinking.
I mean, essentially it's staff, right? So with 75–80% of our total budget being staff, it's additional programming that we have, it's class sizes that are.
I was gonna say, class size is the biggest driver. If most school districts, average class size is 25 to 27, and ours is at 22, 20, at the elementary level, you're gonna accumulate more staff. So it's class size and special programs. Global language at the elementary.
Athletics, having
Athletics.
multiple.
Yeah.
There is a component related to supplementals
Yeah.
and class sizes and all of that, but anytime you're spending more in any of those categorical areas, that's what's driving that. But that's every district, I'll say. So every district is spending in the ballpark, let's call it 12 to 14,000, or 12 to 16,000. We're not unique in that. So, personally, I think that's challenging to understand the funding formula to begin with, that you're basing it off of a number that doesn't actually equal what school districts are spending per pupil. And that's your base.
Right. And then also, again, another thing, not for sure, but the idea that how are we paying staff based on experience? And I know we have such a high quality of staff that might be something interesting to look at too for another time. Just to kind of show the community this is where why we have this big expense for salary.
Yep, and that's a great point, because the calculated funding, that 8,000, is based off of average teacher salary, which is actually the 22 data, and we're in 25. So that's 3 years behind with significant years of inflation in there. We're above the average. So all of these factors kind of start to compound when you look at each of the individual components of the formula.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that is unique about Granville is it sort of, despite the fact that we choose to have a lot of great extracurriculars like sports and the arts and things like that, despite the fact that we stand by great education and the student-teacher ratios and things like that, if you look at our average cost to educate students, it's certainly not much higher, if not just about the same as many other comparative districts across the state. So despite the fact that we're the best school district in Central Ohio by my rating, and many others as well and so forth, we still are not spending more than average to get that. And I think that goes a lot toward the quality of our staff. That goes a lot toward the quality of our community and the long-term dedication of our families and students to the great product that we do and so forth. So, I think it's unique that we have all these things that we offer, but we really are not charging more for it, right? And I think that's the core of the story. Set 5-star education for a 3-star price.
There you go.
So that's the perfect segue then into the expenditure side of the equation. And, excuse me, the opposite of what we saw on the revenue side, where the historical change was greater, emphasize that this is a forecast and this is what we pretty much always see, because it is it's conservative, it includes enrollment growth, and other factors that we'll get into. So there's two things that you can do when you are approaching a decreasing cash balance, and that is increase your revenue or decrease your expenditures. So this is where I think there's opportunity for us to improve over the forecasted period, which will help that cash balance projection.
This slide, I think for the 15 years that I've been on the Finance Committee or Board of Education, always gets my ankles up. It's like, my gosh, we're really going to grow that much more. Because if we historically grew at 6%, which is far higher than GDP growth, we'd never pass a levy, right? And so I always kind of wonder about this, and it shocks me to see that forecast 6% growth. But historically speaking, it's not happened that way, right? But we really need to plan for it. Right, and so it's the right thing in the forecast, but it's also something not to like say, oh, we're just going to increase by 6% a year, so that's all good and fine, right? No, we need to continue to, be diligent stewards of the community's resources and things like that and so forth. And again, every forecast I've seen for the last many years has this feature embedded in it because of the way that they're built, right? And the assumptions that need to go into them, and it's the right assumptions and the right things, but we need to continue to manage to as best we can in the budget to get the product that we want.
Yeah, and what drives that 6% is the 76% on the left, the green, which is personnel costs, so salary and benefits. So anytime you're increasing there, so just our normal base salary and step increases, as well as the ever increasing cost of medical insurance, you're going to see an increase. But also we have assumptions built in for additional staff to address enrollment growth. And so that's one of the biggest pieces that will change. Like, we know the forecast is not going to be accurate. It's not going to match reality. Because every year we make the determination of what staff is needed based on actual enrollment numbers. This is just forecasting. And we do that work every year. So that's where you're going to see changes, is largely, again, in the personnel costs.
And we've been so diligent about that in the past, and it's hard, right? Because if you've been teaching in second grade forever, right, and there's just not many kids in second grade, you might have to switch. You might have to get a certain change in certification or adjust class sizes here, there, and the other thing. But that's so important, and we've had staff that's been willing to step up to that, and leadership that's been willing to kind of manage through that, and we'll always have these bubble classes, and we'll always have unknown growth in enrollment and so forth. So making appropriate adjustments across programs or amongst grades or whatever it takes is kind of critical to making sure that our future year-over-year change is in line with GDP growth, which it has been for the last 50 years.
Yeah, yep, that's a great point. So tying this back to October and where we ended the month, salary and benefits are close to where we've been last year. That's, again, our typical increase in base salaries and steps that we've seen month after month. And then the yellow bar, that includes the capital projects transfer that we approved at the last board meeting. So two things. This is where we see the timing or the change in the cash balance fluctuation throughout the year, why we see that trend change from month to month, because typically our expenditures are about even from month to month, whereas our revenue comes in big chunks at property tax settlement time, and the income tax helps somewhat with that, but our expenditures are pretty even from month to month. So that's what's causing the cash balance fluctuations. Then you do have the one-offs with, for example, the capital projects transfer. But we are choosing to do that so that we, at the end, I have the detail to support that. So I think even having that as a one-off, it kind of skews our history and things like that. that, but it does provide some additional transparency into the capital side and supporting those capital needs with operating dollars.
And some of those capital projects, you've been playing catch-up.
Yeah.
On things that were put on hold, and we're catching up on projects that were put on hold for years.
Deferred maintenance, and it's always more costly in the future than it is right now. So trying to take care of some of those issues is absolutely critical. And we've done a very good job of trying to play catch up over the last, I would say, 6 to 7 years, versus early on in my tenure when it was pretty slim pickings. So we're trying to play catch up. And I think when we, at some point when we do a strategic planning task force conversation, we can show, with Fanning and Howie, when they came in and did their facility assessment, all of our roofs are relatively new. Our rooftop units, our chillers, our boilers, all those are, in the newer phase because we've tried to address those issues as we've gone along over the last 6 or 7 years. Again, some of those things now are even double or triple the cost that they were 5 years ago. So,
2 years ago.
or 2 years ago.
Yeah. But to go to Mr. Miller's point earlier, we're prudent about it, too.
Yes. Yes.
And the nice thing is we are able to address this instead of continually, I call it Band-Aid, putting a Band-Aid on it, which isn't solving anything long-term.
Correct.
Okay, so one of the biggest things to understand about the assumptions on the expenditure side is the role that enrollment projections play, because it does drive staffing. So we've gone over enrollment projections at previous meetings, and we have all of that data. The really hard thing is that those are just projections as well, and there's 2 methodologies. There's looking at historical trends and live birth data, and then there's looking at land use and factoring in potential new developments. So largely what we're showing here is based on live birth, because currently that's more closely aligned with where actual enrollment is. So I think it does skew a little bit some of the staffing assumptions, but again, I would emphasize the importance of that annual process where we review enrollment and what staff we need. The graph on the right, I think puts into a visual what we've been talking about, where our historical cost has been very closely aligned with inflation. So what this does is this shows expenditure per pupil. Again, the historical period is 2020 through 24, and then the line at the top shows what expenditure per pupil would be in each of those years if applying the rate of inflation for that particular year. So, for example, in 21, our expenditure per pupil jumped up a little bit above where inflation said we should be, but then in 23, we were below what the inflation calculation said we should be. So, I am not willing to put a projected inflation line on here. I'm not going to pretend to be an economist or anything. But I think the takeaway is that we have been fiscally responsible. We do look at this metric. I think this is what we are talking about when we say this is a forecast versus a budget. So all of that is important to understand because it drives the expenditure projections. So we will jump into salaries first. So unlike the largest source of revenue, property tax, which is relatively flat over the whole graph on the right, Salaries, different picture. It's continuously increasing. And that is based on steps, which are on average about 1.6%, and base increases for the projected years at 3%. For the current fiscal year, it includes the staffing that we currently have. And for the forecasted years, you can see the breakdown for each year and the number of positions that we have included in each of those years. Again, that's basically our best guess at trying to understand what residential developments are going to do and what potential staff we might need in each of those years. Again, reviewed annually and updated based on actuals. On the benefit side, a lot of the benefits are tied percentage-wise to salaries, so retirement and Medicare are percentage based off of salaries, so as those increase, those associated benefits increase right off the bat. And then the largest driver here is the medical insurance increases. We just did a pretty lengthy review of some insurance data this morning, which largely shows that the 2020 through 2024, basically flat through those 5 years, is kind of an anomaly, and I know you don't typically see a 5-year anomaly, but that's what's happening. We have been pretty aggressive in getting bids from carriers to keep those rates low. That competition really is what's driving those rates and our carrier being willing to maintain that relationship. So for, this is kind of, again, splits between fiscal years because our insurance runs on a calendar basis. So for calendar year 25, we have a 9.9% increase, and then we do have a rate cap guaranteed at 12.5%, and then the forecast that I'm using, or the projection includes 10% as the forecasted years beyond that. And that's, you know, you might be wondering, well, is that low? And maybe, there may be some cliff that we hit with the insurance carrier, and that's largely driven by cost of care and claims. Those are your two key components. And I think the cost of care piece everybody's dealing with, and claims you largely are out of your control. So that is also a piece that is driven by the collective bargaining agreement. I'll also say that for the previous slide. So for the years that are beyond our current agreement, which goes through the end of this year, those are projections. At some point, once we have a contract in place, we'll update the assumptions based on the specifics of the agreement, which will have an impact here as well.
You know, a small part of our benefit cost is for dental insurance, for which we're self-insured. What forecast increase is there in dental? Just out of curiosity, and how is that?
Honestly, I don't know that exact number off the top of my head, so that's a great question. I will, I can get that to you certainly. It is a very small portion, and what I will say is that our loss ratio, so that's the calculation that you look at to see what your performance is on your plan. So it looks at what you're paying in premium compared to what your claims are. If that number is over 100%, it means that the insurance company, or when you're self-funded, you're losing money.
Right.
And so that is where we are sitting currently. We've performed very well on dental since we've been self-funded. But our broker has said that, again, cost of claims, specifically with our carrier, have increased significantly this year. They gave a bump to their providers, and so we are feeling those effects. But the district does bear 100% of that cost as well, which is another negotiation topic.
Well, I think it's kind of notable if we choose to do self-insurance for dental, although it's a small portion. It was an important step, I think, and a good one for us to kind of learn about these trends going forward and so forth, and how we can best manage, in an environment where medical costs are continuing to go up. I think that was kind of a good move. We'll see over time, how that works out, but I think that was the right one, and we can be as aggressive as we can with negotiating, and hopeful that, we most importantly have healthy and staff to support, these kinds of numbers at the most.
And I'll just note that with the dental, since we went self-funded, which was in 21, we have not increased the funding rate, which is essentially the premium, so.
That's great, that's fantastic.
So
Yeah.
that means that the cash balance sitting in that account will go towards offsetting future premiums paid, which is what's occurring this year. So I can say pretty confidently that if we were not self-funded, we certainly would have had an increase in premium at some point in that period of time.
Yeah.
So that's profit to us versus profit to the insurance company, which I think is always a win.
Yes, thank you.
The next category in the expenditures is purchase service. And just want to highlight three of the largest drivers in this line item. We have contracted custodial services, so that's a significant portion. Utilities is the second, and special education services. So custodial contracted services, those are salary-based for that service provider, so that's going to increase with inflation over time, just like we see on salary benefits. So you're always going to see an increase in that line item. Utilities is obviously based on rate and usage, and we just had a meeting last week with our electric provider about what's happening in that arena. And basically, it's the perfect economic example of supply decreasing and demand increasing, which is driving rates up significantly in 25. So that's why we passed that resolution last month for the RFP and contract through Meta. They handle that to get us the best rates. And then we're also going to address what we can on the demand response side, which is essentially reducing usage when we can during high consumption periods of time. So think the hottest days in the summer are the days that they'll look at, and you try to shut down as much as possible to increase capacity that they have to allocate to other users. And then obviously, special education services are driven by salary and benefit costs for those service providers, but more so based on our student population and what the needs of those students are. So that's kind of a non-controllable line item that drives purchase service.
And maybe Ms. Spence can, on the special ed services, my experience, it's getting it's harder than ever to find qualified people to staff those positions.
Yeah, it can be complicated. Our more complicated kids may not be attending school here. So they
Right.
may be attending school some other place and require more than the typical support that we would offer in our environment. So yes, it's definitely been harder for even those environments to hire people.
Right.
Yeah.
Lastly, all other expenditures, just want to highlight this line item, or really multiple line items, for a couple of reasons. So we have the implementation of the capital projects fund, which is the red portion. So for 24, that's based on our actual board-approved transfers. For 25, it's based on those that have already been approved and what we anticipate as we get quotes from vendors to approve before the end of this fiscal year. And then for 26 through 29, we have $2 million in there as a placeholder. And so that, again, that's an area where it's going to be based on the need and the quotes that come in And just as a reminder that this is in addition to our PI, our Permanent Improvement Fund, which is a portion of our inside millage goes to permanent improvement. So this is to supplement what's in that fund. And again, the reasons for needing to do that, we've talked about previously, based on deferred maintenance, increased costs, etc. The last item is supplies, and the significant, that's the blue section of the bars. That significant increase from 23 to 24 was the science of reading materials. It might not be reasonable to expect supplies to be maintained at that level, but frankly, we don't know what's coming from the state at any point in time. So I feel more comfortable leaving at the same level that we had last year. So that's another area where we might see some savings throughout the year.
What's the rough cost of the science and reading curriculum as we found?
200
300,000?
science and reading materials.
Science of reading material purchase, was that 300?
No, just under $200,000.
Okay, 200. Thank you. You guys know I don't like to do numbers off the top of my head. Okay, so that wraps up the forecast. Just a couple more slides to wrap up the October numbers. So the capital projects update. We now have added on here the air handler 1 and 5 at the high school that we approved at the last meeting, but obviously expenditures have not started yet on that project. That I think will largely occur over the summer. Right. And then our cash reconciliation, and that wraps up forecast and October, unless there are any other questions or comments. There's nothing else I forgot.
No, thanks for taking all the questions. That was great. Good job.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else, Jeff? Or are we good on staff reports there?
We're good.
Okay, we're at the public comment section of the meeting. This is a meeting of the Board of Education in public for the purpose of conducting the school district's business and is not to be considered a public community meeting. There's a time for public participation during the meeting, as indicated in the agenda. Let's see, Board Policy BDDH-R, public participation at board meetings. If there's anyone in the audience that would like to participate in public comments, I encourage you to step up to the podium, state your name and address, and share with us. Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on to board discussion.
Okay, I thought it would be an opportunity for board members to kind of share some of the happenings that have been occurring. You know, you've been at multiple events, so I thought it would just be a nice opportunity to share those updates. So,
If nobody minds, I'd just like to give an update on CTEC being a representative on the CTEC board. Dr. Joyce Mullaney, the current superintendent, announced her resignation at the end of the year. So we're going through the process of identifying a replacement.
At the end of the.
End of this school year.
Thank you.
Yes, end of the school year. And then the other thing I'd like to comment on, Mr. Cronk and I were able to attend the Veterans Day breakfast, which Mr. Wake kind of honchoed with other staff and students. Jeff, do you know, it was like 35?
35, yeah.
Veterans were in attendance. It was very well attended. Very nice program. Mr. Captain Don Haven, retired teacher, was the speaker. And it was great. It was great seeing students there with like their parents and grandparents. And it's a great event, and it's getting bigger. I serve on a committee. It's the Veterans Service Commission's Roundtable, and they meet quarterly. And they talked about it as part of what the Veterans Day activities in the county are. So the word's getting out there, and I'll have to admit, as the father of a service member, it's quite a moving and great event to see the entire staff and district embraced those folks that have served. So it was a wonderful event. I was really glad to be able to attend.
Well, I had the opportunity to attend the Ohio School Board Association last week with Jeff, Fred, Amy, and Thomas, not only for the Alliance Luncheon, but I wanted to really talk about that in a second, because I wanted to highlight more of the high school marching band first. Because as mundane as the OSBA can be in certain aspects, our students come first. Really, over the course of the fall, the marching band has, I think, upped their game more so than not only in years past, but versus rival school districts and or college bands. The reason I say that is because the Marching Blue Aces were invited to play at the Denison halftime show a few weeks ago. Not only that, but attended the Circleville Pumpkin Show. Have been invited to a school session at Ohio State University this weekend, which is the biggest game this weekend, featuring two top five teams. Additionally, not only being students who have academically excelled throughout the course of the fall, but have practiced for the Blue Review, in addition to staying in Cleveland 2 Mondays ago until midnight, performing for the 15-0 undefeated Cleveland Cavaliers. So I mentioned just a few of the highlights that the high school marching band has done this fall, just because it's been well more than I think most bands here in Central Ohio, let alone the country, perform in. Additionally to that, I've been able to attend a couple of K-6 PTO meetings. They are actively planning their spring gala, which will hopefully fund the improvement for the playground surface at the intermediate school.
Is it now the K-8 PTO? Am I right? Did they not incorporate the middle school PTO as well?
I don't
There was some
believe-
discussion of that? No, maybe.
So middle school parents has been kind of a subgroup around, but a lot of the arts and athletics still incorporate
Okay,
our middle
so
school
now
as well.
MSD was getting older.
Yeah.
Okay, never mind.
So having said that, I would encourage those who are either new to the community to get involved in K-6, as we have a lot of new families in town. And if you're a new family in town of a middle school or high school, look at the arts and athletic boosters to get involved as well. Getting back to the Ohio School Board Association, one of the things while financing and school funding is fresh on our mind, the OSBA is a membership of 770 school districts in Ohio. We passed language, me being the delegate to that board, with a majority voting yes, to actually propose to state legislation to exempt tax increment financing, or TIFs, from school levies, or school levies would be exempt from that. So while they're not a governing body, the lobbying efforts of the OSBA is actively in the State House with the expansion of the economy in Central Ohio to kind of exempt school funding from those TIFs. That would be a great win, I think, for our 5-year forecasting, but maintaining that source of revenue as well. So a majority voted yes, while we might not see that implemented at all, or let alone in the near future. The OSBA strongly wants school levy or TIFs to be exempt from school funding. So, had an opportunity to attend the Finance Committee meeting as well. Brittany, I mean, a lot of that effort was shown here tonight. Again, thank you for those who in the community participate on that board. And I think what goes into a lot is saying is Granville does a lot with very little, and having not passed any new property tax revenue since 2012, 13, and no new other tax revenues since 2018. So for a school levy cycle or a school district, not to ask for new money from a property tax for well over 10 years, or any other type of new tax in the last 6, is an anomaly. So, especially this fall season, when we saw a lot of unfavorable responses to school levies at the ballot box. So again, it just goes into saying what we do here as a district with the public monies that we do have is quite outstanding. So that is all I have.
Mr. Cronk, do you happen to know when the gala is going to be by any chance?
Sometime in March.
Do they have a date yet, or?
They do. March 20th.
You young people that have children in.
Actually, I think it's March 1st for some
A great
March
event for
1st.
anybody that's not been, whether you've
March
got kids in this building
It's
or
22.
not. It's
You
really
got
great.
it. 5:30.
At Brindley Fieldhouse.
Fantastic. Cool. I've got a couple quick things to bring up. First of all, as excited as I am about five-year forecasts and talking about finance, right? It really is because that financial background supports our kids in the classroom. I had a great opportunity to attend a conference called the Titans of Learning, which had 2 global experts on self-determined learning, organized by Mike Nicholson of the Learning Inspired group. And it was just fantastic to hear kind of from like a high-level visionary perspective, their thoughts on our students' ability to inspire themselves, right? And the initiative that we have, the trend that we have to looking towards self-determined learning as an extension of our work on project-based learning, I know it's going to be a really important step for us. And it was interesting to be there and sit down with staff members from other school districts and administrators and even some students from other school districts to kind of get their perspective on that and realize in the process how far ahead we are in our curriculum thought planning and how fortunate we are to have a great superintendent to lead us through that process. Also, the excitement level of all of our building principals who were able to attend that was great, right? Because they really take that vision and actualize it in our schools. And so it was really, really positive to be there with them, to see them be a part of this. And many of the folks that were in attendance from school districts around Ohio and around the country sort of kind of questioned how they were going to do this and so forth. And I made a strong plug for the event that we will be hosting in March, which is more of a workshop format to really kind of actualize and figure out how to make these kinds of transitions happen in our curriculum. And there's so many great stories that we have here that I know that all the attendees will benefit from hearing from our students and hearing from our teachers that have already started down this path and, well on the way to, inspiring our kids to continue to do great things. So I was just really jazzed by that, and it's really good to sometimes not think only about finance, but really think about the kids and the great academic things that we're going to do. One other thing I want to highlight is the fact that I really enjoyed seeing Clue, the high school performance. It was a wonderful performance and things. But beyond that, I was pleased to be a chaperone for over 20 of our theater students who went to a Columbus High School performance of Clue just last weekend, 2 weeks after they gave the performance themselves. And 2 weeks ago, students from this high school came to Granville, watched us and watched our play, and you could see some of their input in the performance. And so it was really neat, a cultural exchange, because the students who played the various characters and roles got to talk with the other students that played those same roles. Everyone that was there had a chance to go backstage, right, and see how this other district, this other school does their backstage work and so forth. And I think it really drove home to them, and certainly it did to me, just kind of the overall commitment we have to extracurriculars in the arts in terms of how they build and support our kids. This district certainly didn't have the resources to dedicate to the staff or to the facility and so forth. It was great to see, and certainly the parent support. It was interesting looking through the brochure, right, where if you look through the brochure of the program at our school, you see the music boosters and the number of parents and supporters and things like that, and it takes small print on a big page to fit them all. Whereas, at this other district, there were maybe 8 or 10 parents and family members recognize at any level for giving back to the school's music and theater booster program. So it made me just very grateful to our community overall, to the schools themselves for how much we've been able to dedicate to these kinds of things, and to the students, and to see how they connected with other students in different circumstances, and learned a lot from that. But it was a great experience for them, and certainly for me to enjoy watching the show at both places. So that was a fun weekend event, fun for our kids.
And I learned that occurred. I didn't know that. So I just learned something.
It was student
That was great.
organized.
Yeah.
It was completely student
Fantastic.
organized, and it really kind of, again, highlighted the fact that, like, we're developing some great leaders,
Yeah.
right? Because the theater leaders kind of coordinated this and figured out parents to drive, and figured out other things like that to do on the schedule, and bought the tickets, and it,
That's great.
it really kind of, showed to me, like, yeah, you just let the kids loose, right?
Yeah.
You let the kids live, and it's self-determined and so forth, and they self-organized, and they made a great event out of it, so.
Can I just tell you, the theater kids go to IHOP after the cast party, and they call ahead to tell IHOP they're coming.
Yeah.
I mean, would I think to do that? If we all want to go to IHOP after this, would I call ahead? No, I would not. So the fact that they think ahead, I mean, someone's doing a good job with these kids.
Yeah.
This is Rocker.
Yeah.
Tim Stanton.
Yeah, exactly, right? They've kind of learned these lessons in leadership and organization and so forth, and the respect that they have for each other and for the other students in the other school and things like that were really cool to see. So it was just a very positive experience. Thank you.
Anyone else? Move on to the action agenda.
All right, item 10.01 is the board policy adoption list.
So moved.
Second.
And just as a reminder, this is really the September update that came from a lot of the legislation that was passed during the summer. We are currently now in lame duck. We anticipate there will be additional policy. I say that tongue in cheek. We know that there are going to be additional policy changes moving from out of lame duck into the next General Assembly. So, if there are any questions?
Take the roll, please.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Cron?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Next item is 10.02, approval of the 25-26 district calendar.
So moved.
Second.
And as a reminder, this is a process that includes staff members from a committee. Mr. Burnett facilitates that committee, and this is the second reading and approval.
Take the roll, please.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds? Mr. Cron?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Next item is 10.03, approval of a GHS Club Best Buddies.
So moved. Second.
And this is Tara Parsley will be the liaison for the Best Buddies Club. But you may have seen commercials nationally about pairing students with special needs with students that are quote-unquote typical. But, we all know that every student is unique. But it's a great opportunity for students to become friends that may not necessarily ever associate with each other in a different format. So the reason why we're approving it is there is funding coming from a donation from Kiwanis and other sources. So we're very appreciative of this opportunity for our students. And we do also have multiple low incidence units in our school district that provide services for surrounding school districts, students as well. So it's not just about Granville kids. It's about all kids.
And this is at GIS?
GHS.
G, 7 through 12.
Okay, gotcha, thanks.
I'm excited to hear about this program, and maybe the Rotary can step up and, since Kiwanis, just saying.
You know any Rotarians?
$501. Should come from Rotary.
Please take the roll.
Ms. Deeds? Aye. Ms. Shaw?
Aye.
Mr. Cron?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Okay, annually we must approve a statement of compliance for nutritional standards, so that is 10.04.
So moved.
Second? And that basic statement says that we are in alignment with the national standards.
Take the roll, please.
Mr. Cron?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
10.05 is the approval of a new supplemental position and job description for Sports Media Club Advisor.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, so this is part of kind of a transition where we integrated a new scoreboard and video scoreboard into our athletic complex, and now we need people to actually run it. So it will have students and an advisor associated with that. And long-term, we're hoping that that transitions into a co-curricular activity that is a class designed for the creation of video production.
It's been really great to see what students have done with media these days, right? And that's such a trend, and it's such an important aspect for kids to learn how to communicate through all these different mechanisms. So if this role can help but support students in learning those kinds of skills, I think they're going to be well utilized going forward for sure.
Yeah, and it's something we talked about when the idea of replacing the scoreboard was first discussed, and I'm excited to see we're moving towards what hopefully is, as Mr. Brown said, a class. Please take the roll.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds? Mr. Cron?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Next is consent agenda 11.01A through D.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, I will highlight the donation of $500 from the Granville Kiwanians to our Best Buddies program. And then I would also like to call your attention to item 4, administrative staff contracts. We have an assistant director of technology that will begin January 2nd. Eric Leonards is coming from Clark Shawnee School District. He's a current tech director, has been in that position for 7 years, is moving back to the area. But really with the departure of Shelly Bailey, Glenn has been holding everything together, knock on wood, in his department. And this position will support and augment the great work that he does every single day. There's not a thing that we do that doesn't have a technology component at this point. That definitely has evolved over his 12 years in the district, or 13 years, 14.
14.
Yeah, so,
Who's counting?
yeah. Back when Glenn and I had hair. And then there are a couple of resignations with appreciation, and then we have a couple of new hires that are replacing some of the people that have departed. It seems like we hire a bus driver, then one leaves. We hire a bus driver, then one leaves. So we're kind of hoping that that stabilizes here in the near future, and then a couple of overnight field trips.
Take the roll, please.
Ms. Shaw?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Cron?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Item 12.01, approval of the October 2024 financial report.
So moved.
Second.
Any other discussion on that? Okay, take the roll, please.
Mr. Cron?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Item 12.02, approval to adopt the 5-year forecast statement.
Second.
I do have one kind of question or clarification on this. I apologize I didn't bring it up earlier. Talking really about the levy cycle, right? Often a question that comes out is like, when's the next levy? And whether that be a committee to organize it or voters to approve it and things like that. We didn't really talk about that specifically in the cash balance forecast, but can you say any general things about, do we need to run a levy this year or next year? Or
Yeah.
when it is that we might need to run what levies relative to when they renew and so forth? Just so we have a general statement out there.
Yeah, so the cash balance policy is really what guides that decision, so kudos to the board for passing that, because I think that's gonna be helpful in the future. So the year that we, are projected to be below that threshold is fiscal year '28, so that's, the 27-28 school year. So we would wanna start having discussions, again, based on this forecast sitting here today, around that time frame about a, additional operating levy. The income tax can be renewed at any point in time prior to the expiration. So that can be any time prior to that. So thinking about the big picture and the timing of those two will be something to consider.
You don't want to layer requests. So, probably taking care of another renewal of the income tax, because that is going to be necessary at some point prior to a new operating request would probably be advantageous, but again, timing is, to be determined.
But likely with the forecast, there's nothing we need to be on the ballot with next calendar year.
Correct.
And we need to just think about that layering factor with the expectation and understanding that a renewal of the income tax is very important, right? Because it is at least 20% of our operating income. So that's going to be an important factor at some point, in addition to the normal inflationary requirement for incremental property tax. But it's not next calendar year. Beyond that, we'll have more specifics on what the updated forecast is and what that timing can be. Is that fair statement?
And that we will still always, because we live in Ohio, and 55% of our revenue comes from property tax, we will always be in that cyclical process that is created by House Bill 920 that was referenced earlier. So we are always going to be subject to that levy cycle where you build up cash and then spend down, and then you have to come back and get new money.
And another thing I forgot to ask was more about a bond levy, right? And I believe that in the financial forecast, we do have some temporary classroom monies, but how does that relate? And I guess it's hard to answer that question without development, so maybe you could address like what we do have in the budget and what we might expect, so
Yeah, so
people can
part
understand that.
of the money that we have allocated as part of the capital projects fund could fund some type of, classroom environment if we needed to, if we got into a high growth environment. But, the facility master planning process is really, again, to describe what we're going to be doing in response to growth when it occurs. Just when it occurs will be subject to, the actual dirt moving and homes being built and students arriving. We won't do it until we know what exactly we need to build, but we want to make sure people understand what process we will use and what that might look like in the future through the facility master planning process.
So if they're, to be real clear, conversations about it are how it would work potentially.
Yes.
It's not, I don't want anybody to
It's not definitive.
misconstrue
Right.
being prepared with doing it
Yes.
right away.
It's kind of like a 5-year forecast and a
Right.
budget.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And we're anticipating the community
Yes.
portion of that process to be late winter.
Well, so yeah, late winter, potentially even an opportunity early December, mid-December, and then it's all honestly subject to availability of space because, as you know, our space is heavily utilized for a lot of activities in December. So either December or January will be the first large community meeting, which will kind of kick off that process. Today, our students were in focus groups, working with our facility master planner, so that we had 4 or 5 student focus groups talking about their learning experience and what the facility either enhances or detracts from.
And also, the strategic planning task force will meet to go through the facility master plan just this Wednesday.
Yes.
Right, so that's a committed group of 30-plus residents that have expertise in everything from real estate to construction to, everything else that will kind of be some of the first ones that are spearheading us through that process.
Correct.
So things are moving forward, and we definitely need public input, likely in the near future.
Yep.
Thanks. All right, sorry, that was just my extra questions I forgot to ask earlier on the 5-year forecast side. I have no more on that.
Please take the roll.
Ms. Deeds? Aye. Ms. Shaw?
Aye.
Mr. Cron?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Item 12.03, resolution to establish the account for Best Buddies.
So moved. Second.
So this is the Associated Student Activity account that we will use to track the Best Buddies program that we approved earlier.
To put in all that Kiwanis money.
Yes.
Okay. Take the roll, please.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw?
Aye.
Mr. Cron?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Item 12.04, approval of the funds transfer from the general fund to Best Buddies account.
So moved.
Second.
So in addition to the Kiwanis donation, Gwen has graciously offered to contribute from her budget to this program as well. So that shows the commitment to the administration for this group, but it does require board approval.
Please take the roll.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Cron?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Item 12.04, approval of the then and now resolution for links at Echo Springs.
So moved.
Second.
As a reminder, any expense exceeding $3,000 that did not have a purchase order in place prior to incurring the expense requires board approval. So that is the necessary requirement to pay that facility rental fee.
And that's for our golf teams,
Yes.
correct?
Yep.
Take the roll, please.
Mr. Cron?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw?
Aye.
Mr. Cron?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye. Adjourned.